Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest is an author, teacher, and substance abuse counselor. But before all that, he was a bank robber. The son of a Harvard linguist, he witnessed 2 of his mother's failed suicide attempts while still in his teens, and eventually found a creative home for himself in the world of punk rock, becoming a highly sought-after tour manager for acts like the Dead Kennedys. But when his heroin addiction made him largely unhireable, and then incapable of managing his burgeoning drug empire, he turned to petty crime, which slowly escalated to a series of bank robberies in the Bay Area, where he and his band of hold-up artists became known as the Men in Black. This is a fascinating portrait of the strange, slippery slope that is addiction and the capricious nature of grace. Won't you please welcome Patrick O'Neill. So what's your name?
Patrick O'Neill.
Patrick O'Neill. Yeah. And where were you born?
I was born in Madison, Wisconsin.
Madison, Wisconsin.
I was only there for 6 months.
6 months, and then what happened?
My dad's a linguist.
Right.
So we traveled around the world. And he teaches and researches languages.
Right.
And so we were, for one, bouncing between universities.
Right.
And then the other part was we would go to Europe because he would always find a language with no origin.
Right.
So we would go to Iceland and the Faroe Islands and then parts of Norse languages, and we'd be, all over the place. And so from 1 to 12, I lived in like 10 different places.
Right.
Like a year each, almost like an army brat, but it was totally different.
Did you find that challenging as a kid?
Yeah. I felt I was always the new kid on the playground.
Right.
I always felt like I didn't fit in. A lot of countries I didn't speak the language.
Right.
It was like everyone talks about alienation.
Right.
It was total alienation.
And then at 12, where did you settle down?
My dad finally got a full professorip at Harvard University.
Oh, wow.
He settled down in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
That's some serious settling.
Yeah, and he passed away a couple of years ago, but
right.
he's a famous linguist, and he was with Noam Chomsky and people like that.
Right.
He moved over to MIT.
And what was his sort of area of expertise?
It was actually Old English and English,
right.
and then he got into pedagogy and teaching,
right.
and he got the whole thing of how to teach people, especially in American urban settings, and trying to meet people on their own language and stuff like that.
Fascinating.
It was amazing guy. Pretty.
Cool.
So it was a little rough, to be a kid, to be his son, and there was 3 of us. I had an older sister and a younger sister. And and we weren't exactly well off because he was on a assistant professor scholarship or a Fulbright or whatever
right.
he was on, and so we were like piling the VW microbus and drive to all these places, and he was also a guy that hated crowds, so we.
Right.
Always went to the alternative. We never went to Disneyland and stuff like that.
Right,
we went to the north side of the Grand Canyon, and
right.
and we our vacation was like in Labrador and Newfoundland and
right,
stuff like that.
Right, to escape.
Yeah.
So. And so did things sort of get more stable and normal when you moved to Cambridge?
No, things went off the rails. So my parents were, I always tell this story. I have a picture of my parents before the divorce, and my mom looked like Mary Tyler Moore. My dad looked like Che Guevara, and so it's sort of like, what the hell?
What were they doing together? Right?
And to this day, I have no idea what they were doing together. And so, he was just during the Vietnam War. He got really political. And she really wanted to be like a Harvard wife. She wanted to be this whole thing, and she had this whole idea for herself.
Right.
Plus, to be fair, she had put her life on hold. They met in grad school in Wisconsin, at Madison. And she put her life on hold, had kids, and he became the professor that he was. And so she sort of looked at that life as happening.
Right.
And he kind of realized he didn't want to have kids. He didn't want to be in a family. He wanted to do all this other stuff. And he wanted to protest the war. He was doing things like not paying his taxes, and the FBI would come in and take his bank account. And, he was, he really put his money where his mouth was, kind of guy. And my mom took it really hard. And also, being Irish, they didn't really dare air their dirty laundry in public. So, it was the kind of thing like they maybe were fighting, but it was upstairs. We never really knew about it. And then one day my dad was gone. You know, it was just like, what? You know, it's like,
yeah.
you know, what's this? And then my mom was really, really volatile. She took it really hard, and she attempted suicide twice.
Right.
And so she took a bunch of pills, and she slit her wrists, and I found her both times.
How old were you?
I was about 11, 12, right in that area.
And they were both close, both incidents were close to each other?
Yeah, like literally got out of the hospital 4 months later, she did it again. And
jeez.
Yeah,
and
so it was rough.
How, I mean, did you understand what was happening as a 12-year-old when you see your mother bleeding, or you just see blood and you're like, we got to call the hospital?
Well, you know, yes and no. I mean, there was a lot of things going on, and I really I was really impressionable at that age, and what I internalized, and I found out this later on in therapy and recovery and things like that, was I internalized that my mom didn't care about me and didn't want to check out.
Sure.
And so a lot of times I just sort of internalized it all, that I was an unwanted child, and
that I think is a fair takeaway.
Yeah, and it was right, like well, and it's typical.
I mean, obviously there's a lot more going on, but like she's not feeling like she's got you're not important enough to stick around for.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
God, I think about killing myself all the time, and I'm always like, oh, I can't because I got kids.
Right. Well, she wasn't there. She's also like my parents. There's not a lot of addiction except on my mom's side, and that's when she started taking a lot of pills.
Right.
And also, it was the 70s.
Right,
so
when the Quaaludes
were like, here,
come on, this will make you feel better.
5,000 Valiums. It'll be good for you. So that was rough. And right about that time, two things were happening. I was my solace away from the family craziness and everything was to be an artist, and I started drawing. Right. And I wanted to be a cartoonist. I was really big on comic books and things like that, much to the chagrin of my dad. Not that he was against art. He was sort of, he wanted me to kind of read books, and I was wasn't a big book reader. I got into art, and I sort of, through him and some other people, I became the youngest published cartoonist in America at about 13, 14.
Wow. And where were the cartoons published?
There was a magazine called Kids Magazine, and it was part of Junior Scholastics, and it came out of it was and then so I was in like almost every issue for the first year and a half. Amazing. And I had a comic called Sailor Tom, and it was kind of it was Peter Maxey looking, kind of thing like that.
Yeah.
The best I could do. Right. Because when you're kind of young, you borrow.
Sure.
I didn't really have my own style. Absolutely. And then the other thing happened is that home life was a mess, and I decided not to be at home. And it was also, late 60s, early 70s. There was a lot of music happening. Right. There's the Boston Commons and the Cambridge Commons. There was like concerts every Sunday or on the weekends with local bands, and a lot of hippies smoking pot and things like that. And that's where I gravitated to. How great! And I gravitated to drinking and smoking pot at a really young age.
And so I'm like, how great! It sounds amazing to me.
Right?
And it's supposed to be a cautionary tale, but I'm always like, wow. And so did you live on the streets, or did you move in with friends? Or
no, I lived at home, but home was just chaotic.
But you were just like not there,
I was
really
just never
anymore,
there.
right?
And my mom like literally started rescuing cats and turned into a cat lady. At one point, we had 50 cats in the house.
Oh my God!
And my sister was sort of out there. My little sister has cerebral palsy; she couldn't get away. Sure. So my mom was sort of really concerned on her. I feel like unseen. And when I was out on the street doing crazy stuff and getting loaded and dabbling in crime and that kind of stuff like that, no one cared.
When did you have your first drink?
About 11.
11, and was that just? What were the circumstances?
My parents used to throw huge parties, and and then in the morning you go down and there's all these half drunk drinks down there, and they're passed out from upstairs.
Sure.
And you go down and just sort of sample a few things and drink them and get.
And did you get a buzz? Do you remember getting a buzz off that?
I got hammered and sick.
Right.
Which didn't stop me from there going on.
And how does it progress from there? Like as you're is booze the first thing, or is it more pot, or where are you sort of?
It was a combination of all. I mean, booze was a little hard to get when you're 11 and 12.
Right.
And unbelievably enough, in those days, pot and LSD and pills were really easy to get.
Right.
So that escalated. always kind of punctuated with booze, and then it was burning a lot of pot. And
did you have a posse of other kids?
Yeah,
that you
had
were...
a whole posse of other kids because it was kind of like Harvard and MIT's elite sons and daughters,
the worst of the worst,
right, who were just total fuck ups, and so
amazing.
And we would all sort of meet in places that like parks and stuff like that at
right
night,
just hustle up trouble.
Just get loaded.
And were you the most troublesome of that posse, would you say?
I was one of them that parents didn't want their kids to hang out with. You can't hang out with him. Right. And I was a mess, and my parents were a mess, and my mom was a mess.
And were you going to school?
I was going to school, and oddly enough, because it was around the wartime, they had put me into Quaker school,
right?
Because they were trying to get like a deferment or something like that.
Right.
Because the draft stopped a couple of years before I was eligible,
right.
So it was pretty real.
Yeah.
That was the days when you watch the news and they'd show the actual fighting in Nam on the news and stuff like that. And so I was going to a Quaker school, which was all the same kids we're talking about there, right. Which was kind of an open education, very experimental, and that's sort of where I really got into art. I had a really good art teacher and stuff like that. So, I was doing the thing, but here's the thing that was really a pain in the ass was I had an undiagnosed learning disorder. I'm dyslexic, right? And so another thing I internalized was that, and my father actually called me dumb once, as I felt I was dumb, right? But it was I couldn't read that well, sure. And I transposed letters verbally, and had a real hard time with some words,
How ironic.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that must have been in some ways hard for him as a
really hard. As really a hard.
Linguist.
Yeah. It was really hard, and I wasn't achieving what I feel he thought I should, or maybe more like what he thought everybody else thought I should,
And did you manage to graduate from high school?
I did.
Right.
But I graduated from high school out here because my mom at one point said, screw you, I'm taking the kids and leaving. Right. And she came out to California to pursue her degree in social work. Right. And that's talk about culture shock. She went to the University of Fresno. Wow. And so I left Cambridge, Massachusetts, and came to Fresno, literally getting off Highway 99, and a tumbleweed was really going across the highway.
Sure.
Going, where the hell am I?
And what year was that?
That would be 73.
Yeah, Fresno in 73. I just can't imagine.
Well, it was all lowriders and, drinking wine and reds and a lot of pot, and then sort of Haitian kind of rock and rollers, right. Kind of like that. With bad. And
were you pissed to have to come to Fresno?
Angry. I was very angry at it, yeah. I was a pretty angry kid,
right.
Though if you asked at the time, I would have told you I wasn't angry. But I was really angry. So I ended up going to hippie free school. Right. And what you did is you go there for a couple of years, then you test out with equivalency tests, and I got out. And so I got out in 75. I graduated high school. Right. And then a year later, we moved to San Francisco, and I got a scholarship to go to San Francisco Art Institute.
Oh, wow.
And I went in as a printmaker, which is weird because I want to do my drawings and illustrations and prints. I really got into etchings and printing. It's sort of where it went. And then my artwork started evolving to getting into movement, and I became an animator. Right. And I got a film degree. That's what I came out of there with.
From, what? I'm sorry, what's the school called?
San Francisco Art Institute.
Right, yeah. That's the... I was going to say it's the American Legion, but it's not, is it?
No, it's down in the Fisherman's Wharf, North Beach, and it's actually just closed.
Oh, really?
It's one of the last fine art schools in America, and they financially screwed themselves.
Yeah, it's a tough business.
Yeah. And two things happened at San Francisco Art Institute. Punk rock showed up, and there was a lot of bands coming out of there, and heroin showed up in my life. And I went to art school at 17. Got out when I was 20 with a BFA. Didn't know really what to do with it. Kind of felt like I was making gold yo-yos for the rich in art school. It's kind of one of those kind of things. And it's
not a bad business,
right. If you can get it. Well, the one thing fine art school doesn't do is it doesn't teach you how to make money. Mm-hmm. It teaches you how to make art. Great, you can make art, but how to make a living off it? They never talk about it. And I sort of transitioned from being a rock and roll kid with long hair into a punk rocker.
Right.
And this would be like 78, 79.
What bands were you into?
Well, like, of course, the Ramones came out and like that. The first band I ever saw was a band out of Canada called DOA.
Right.
And they played at this club downtown in North Beach called the Mabuhay Gardens. And I went down there and went, oh my God.
Right.
And this was kind of like during the time when bands like Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and all these other huge bands were doing arena rock, and it felt so removed.
So
you go to this club and there's these three guys up on stage and they're 2 feet away from you and they're just rocking it out. And I was like, this is what rock and roll is.
Right. Yeah.
And cut my hair and that was about it.
And so, that became your scene?
That totally became my scene. And I started hanging out down there and I started working at the clubs. I had a healthy heroin habit. I had a healthy meth habit.
How did you discover heroin? Like, what was that first experience like? I'm just sort of...
Well, the first experience was that somebody was saying that this is I don't know what they called it, but they're inferring that it was like condensed THC or something like that. It was an organic drug. It was good for you,
Right.
And I snorted it, and it was like white China whitey stuff probably, and I was totally loaded. And whenever people talk about how they finally found what they've been looking for, that was it. I finally looked good. Mind you, I smoked pot for 10, 15 years, and I hated pot.
Right.
It made me paranoid.
Yeah.
I didn't really like it, but it was sort of the drug of choice. It was always available.
Everyone smoked pot.
But heroin was like, oh my God.
Right.
But the only problem is there was like a real bad connotation to it. It was like, because Coke was cool. You always do Coke. Everybody could do Coke.
Right.
But heroin, you're a junkie. And I was, but then I was like, all my heroes are junkies. Keith Richards, Bob Dylan, like all these people were like, Burroughs, all these people were like, Jack Kerouac were all dabbled in it. Those are all my heroes. And so I sort of jumped into a full on and very quickly went from snorting and smoking to shooting.
Right.
And got into that.
And then how does meth come into that mix?
It was just sort of there,
right?
It was just it was kind of thing where it was just there was all these two kind of camps. There was like these meth head speed freaks, and then there's the junkie drug addicts, and it sort of was like we could gravitate to one to the other,
right?
Later on, a few years later, I lived at a house called Mission A in San Francisco, which was an old boarding house, had 2 floors of rooms, and like 30 people, about 20 people lived there. And the first floor was speed freaks, and the second floor was heroin addicts. So it was just bizarre, And but I was, well, it's hard to say this, but it was kind of controlled using. I wasn't like full blown drug addict. The first time I felt like I was kicking drugs, I was like, I feel like I have a cold, and people were like, no, you're jonesing for heroin. Right. I was like, oh, that's what this is.
Right.
And I was really young. I was like 20s. Invincible, like that.
And are you productive at that point? Like from an art standpoint?
Well, no, I moved over into music.
Right.
And I started playing music in a bunch of really bad bands that never went
What was
anywhere.
your instrument?
I was a bass player.
Right.
And I started played a bunch of bad bands and was on stage and then started working on stage and then started working for bands that were a bigger Milu kind of.
Right.
So I started working for Dead Kennedys.
Right.
And a band called Flipper and a band down here in LA called TSOL and another band from England called Subhumans. Those are the main bands I worked for.
And what were you doing?
I was a roadie at first.
Right.
And then I quickly moved up to be a road manager or tour manager.
Sure.
And started touring for 6 years. And it's the best job for a drug addict. You're constantly
Totally,
moving.
yeah. You never have to face anything, no consequences. Move on, clean this up. We're out of here. We're out of here. Someone pay the bill.
Right. And so just constantly moving and I did that for 6 years. And, like people always say, like in the beginning, drugs are working because we wouldn't do drugs if they weren't working.
Yeah,
and that's kind of when drugs were working.
Yeah.
It was good, and there, at the end of that whole thing, it was sort of falling apart.
At the end of the 6 years.
Yeah. Well, a lot of things happened. Like punk rock at that original time sort of fell apart. The bands I was working for all kind of broke up.
Right.
I was just I kind of lost it. I was kind of unhireable.
Right.
At that point, and luckily that things I didn't. I was actually very good at my job. Never stole money, never did anything like that. I was well paid and really good at my job. But I was getting towards those what ifs, those lines you couldn't cross.
Right. Sure.
And that's what was happening.
Yeah.
And so it sort of, music sort of abandoned me. I sort of tried pursuing it, but not really, and sort of folded into me more of a heroin addict full time.
And where did you sort of settle geographically?
I lived in San Francisco.
Right, so you stayed there.
Yeah, stayed up there, like there.
So at the end of the 6 years, you're basically you're back in San Fran.
Yeah,
right.
In San Francisco. And, I was working at a record label as the art department, sort of making posters and album covers for its Alternative Tentacles, which is the Dead Kennedys label. Right. And, I was a total mess, and I barely held that job down. And at some point, my girlfriend of 6 years was very strung out, really depressed. Her mom just committed suicide. All these things were happening in her life. She attempted suicide. And then she realized she was dying. She was actually dying. She decided the only person she knew who had a car was my mother. She called my mother and asked her if she'd come take her to the hospital. And on the way to the hospital, she said, something like, "Oh, me and Patrick have been drug addicts for 7 to 8 years." And my mom was like, "What? I just thought he was tired all the time." And I came home to a family being very upset at me. And I attempted to try to get clean. Right. And so I left. I left San Francisco for New York City, which is crazy if you think about it. Right. But my older sister lived out there. I went out there and helped her remodel a house and do a bunch of other stuff. And I sort of stayed Keith Richards clean, right. Which is sort of, I drank a fifth of booze every night because I had no idea what recovery was.
Of course.
I just thought you stop doing heroin, right. Everything's going to be great. You know? And I relatively stayed clean a couple of times. I did heroin. There was heroin everywhere in New York at that time. It was the 80s. It was crazy. And then I sort of got my life together. I got back into working. After a year, I felt like I sort of had this together, but no AA, no recovery, right. No nothing, anything like that. And so I came back here and immediately moved to LA and started working for Golden Voice and a couple of other big production companies down here as a stagehand. Nice. Which I thought was a little below me because I was a big tour manager.
You'd been running the show. Right, yeah.
But also, and quickly got back into drugs again. Right, and, went from drinking at shows to, this isn't what I want to do, and started doing heroin again, and really went off the deep end. And a friend of mine who was the sound man for Red Hot Chili Peppers, and a couple other bands, he and I started putting together. We started selling heroin in Hollywood, right? And to all musicians. It was all the people we knew, and it got quite big. Wow! It was sort of this thing happening.
That's kind of exciting.
It was a heady time.
What was your where would you? How was talk to me a little bit about the business? Like, well, I'm just sort of curious, like how you would procure and how much, and then what the markup is and how you distribute it.
Got it.
These are all questions I've learned from watching Breaking Bad.
Right. Exactly. Well, unfortunately, we were making it, but
oh, you were making it?
No. I said unfortunately, we weren't making it.
I was going to say because
that's pure profit.
Yeah, that's some real. That's where the real margin is.
Well, we had a connection out of Long Beach, right? And this is pre-cartel stuff, right. So who knows who was involved? Yeah, but we would pretty much go down there, buy ounces, bring them back up, break them down into grams. And just sort of sell on the street. But the thing was, we had enough money to buy ounces or 2 ounces, but probably sell 3 or 4 during the day. So it was North Beach, Hollywood. I mean, Long Beach, Hollywood, Long Beach, Hollywood, Long Beach, Hollywood, all day long. Until we got up to Capitol, we could buy larger pieces. Right. And we opted for selling the street level, right, which was grams. Not quarter grams, something like that, but grams, and because that was the highest profit. So we were doubling and tripling our money. And
what did it back then? A gram of
heroin was like $80.
$80,
yeah,
right.
$20 a quarter,
right.
And then it was like classic drug dealer 1990. It was pagers and payphones.
And for for a user, how far does a gram go?
Well, I was shooting about 2 or 3 a day.
Right.
So, but that's a high level. Most drug addicts on a street level were probably shooting a gram a day. Right. And there were people actually who were doing less. It depends on how strong. The progression with heroin is it takes more and more and more to achieve your high. Sure. And I'd be there shooting a half gram shot and not feeling it, and the kid next to me do like a quarter gram and OD.
Just, right.
What the hell's wrong with me here? This dope sucks. Like that. And it got to be pretty hectic. We got to be rather large in Hollywood.
Were you guys making some money?
Yeah, we were making some money. We had an apartment that we sold out of. We didn't live in, things like that. But
where was the place?
It was over in West Hollywood, off of Sunset, down by Guitar Center,
right.
And it was. I don't know if we really thought about it as having an empire or anything like that, but it was definitely a good business. And also kept us well in our drugs. Right. And then at some point, cops started getting involved. We started getting closer and closer, getting arrested. Chris did get arrested and ended up in getting busted.
That was your business partner?
Yeah, got busted in Long Beach. And at some point, he ran into the wrong crowd and was murdered over a drug deal that I should have been at. And so I would have been with him, but we sort of were kind of falling apart at that point. And I got kind of scared at that point, and I decided that I'd go clean up. Right. I go clean up my act, and so I called my older sister in San Francisco and said, "I need help." And she said, "You bet, come on home." And I went, "Okay." And I jumped on a plane, leaving everything there, and my car, my girlfriend, all this stuff. Even though it was a total mess anyway. Right. Nothing was going well. And I flew up to San Francisco thinking that I could just kick drugs in her apartment and sort of hang out. And when I got to the airport, there was my dad and my sister. My dad lives on the East Coast, and my sister, and they got me in a car and they drove me to Marin County. And I said, "Where the hell are we going?" And we pulled up in front of this sort of hospital looking building, and I went, "Oh shit." Right. And they said, "These people will help you." And I went in. It was a 30-day rehab called Ross Hospital. It was actually kind of an expensive place up there. Yeah. And I was like, not having it. I just think, you got to be kidding me. This is crazy. And my sister's like, "I have a 2-month-old daughter right now. You can't come to my house and kick drugs. It doesn't look good." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And my dad was there, and he's like, "Get your shit together." And I went in there, and it was just, it was pretty horrible. It was a really nice place. Don't get me wrong. It was a very expensive place. They spent some money on it. Sure. But I just wasn't there. I wasn't in that headspace. They put me in the detox ward. There's nobody else there. And I sort of went through 3 days of kicking with no real kick drugs and got put back in population. And it was all kind of well-to-do alcoholics. Right. And, a couple of stewardesses that had pill problems. Right. And I was like, "I'm a junkie. I'm better than you are."
Right. I'm so much more hardcore.
Hardcore. I don't belong here. And, and I was horrible. I was a horrible client. I was really an asshole, believe it or not. I was pretty self-centered in those days, and really, there's the deal. I didn't want to use. I wanted no consequences. Right. I wanted to use and not have to be, beholden onto the drug dealer. I wanted all these kind of things that were a fantasy. Right. Sure. And it couldn't happen. And I went to a meeting one of the first nights there, and they were talking about it was chip night. I would get my my newcomer chip and all this stuff like that. And I was thinking, corn chips or dip or food or something like that. Right. And we went there, and they said, "Who's got 0 to 29 days?" And they pushed me to go up there. I go, "I do." And they go, "Oh, we're out of chips. We're out of newcomer chips." I go, "What a piece of shit place this is. Fuck you." And I was angry at that, and I didn't know what it was about. But all of a sudden I was getting screwed, And another time there was a counselor there who was just a total, really uptight guy, kind of the person you look at, that's not what I want, sobriety. Right. And he would drive us to meetings, and he was a graduate of the program. We'd all pile in his van, and back then I could smoke, so I sat in front of the front seat so I could smoke out the window. And they were talking. The thing of chips came up again, and he's like, "I got 7 years," and they go, "Oh, really? You have a chip?" He goes, "Yeah," and he pulls it out. And he hands it to all these women in the back, and I'm like getting pissed off because he's getting more attention than I am, whatever. Right. And the chip came up to me, and I was like, "Let me see that." And I tossed it out the window of the car as we're driving. Guy slams on the brake, gets out screaming at me. He's down the hill looking for it. Comes back, tries to attack me. I lock myself in the van. This whole thing. I was just an asshole, and I was like, "Where's your higher power now, asshole?" And I was just totally.
I assume he did not find that chip.
No, he didn't. And the next day, I got called into the director's office, and they're like, "You need more help than we can offer you." Right. And they were suggesting I go to some really hardcore programs in the city. And I was like, "Fuck you," and I left. I called my girlfriend in L.A. She drove up, and I left. Right. And that was my big first, foray into getting clean. I went back down to L.A. and just got worse and worse. And You know, I was holding up drug dealers. I didn't have any money. I was like, I had no scam anymore because there was no coming back from that. I didn't have a pile of money waiting people down there because I was living hand to mouth. And
sure.
And it just got worse and worse and worse till I was sort of like.
And were you able to sort of maintain that business even though it was no
business was gone. Business was gone. Everything was gone. You know, and I was unhireable at rock things. You know, I got hired onto the first Lollapalooza show. The first one that we were doing these rehearsals in Culver City Studios, big sound stages, and because I knew one of the guys who was running the crew, and he hired me to come on, and I totally blew it. I was loaded. I was an asshole. You know, people just and I was total dick to people. And at the end of the night, he gave me my check and said, we're not hiring you. So basically, I got kicked off the Lollapalooza tour, which was full of drug addicts because I was too much of a drug addict. You know? Right. Get out of here. And again, I saw the writing on the wall, and I moved back to San Francisco, claiming to be clean, claiming to be cleaned up, really scared of heroin because it was taking me in the wrong direction. And I got hooked up with some friends and started shooting. This way to get clean again was started shooting meth 2 times a day. Oh, God. And it was just horrible. But I was very productive. I had a job. I started working in the construction. I started doing these things. And it was like, I thought, well, this is better.
At least it's not heroin.
I'm productive. I've rented an apartment. I'm doing this.
I haven't slept in.
I haven't slept in 2 years. And I'm out of my goddamn mind. And that didn't last long. It was about 1.5 years. And I met a young girl who I fell in love with, and she was into opiates. And I can remember like exactly what happened. It was like one day going down to where they sell drugs in San Francisco on the street, knowing that this was going to be the turning point. I was going to go back there to go back to heroin. Right. And it was again that same feeling like shooting heroin. I was like, oh yeah, this is what drugs are about. This is what I do. This is what it's about. And now I'm no longer nervous and biting my inside of my mouth and being crazy. Now I'm like relaxed and can actually talk to people and do the other things there. Right. And that went for a couple of years, and I didn't really have a hustle. And she was really very young and didn't have a hustle at all either. And so we started getting into petty crimes. I started, it's the natural progression of a drug addict, especially of a heroin addict. And when you're doing a couple grams a day, it gets to be pretty bad.
You got to figure out some way to pay for it.
Yeah, that's a couple $100 a day minimum, and you sort of get this stuff together. And so we're doing like stealing things and sort of stuff like that.
Do you remember the first like crossing that line when you were like, oh yeah, we just stole something?
Yeah. The real one was a sort of scam where you go look in the trash at around a store, and you find a receipt that has whatever was bought there. Then you go into the store and you grab those things and then go up to the front counter and say, I want to return these things. Right. And they're like, who returns candy? Right. I do. And so it was like, and it became sort of scammy. Like you couldn't go to the same store anymore. Right. And just sort of everything just got sort of worse and worse and worse. Sort of like just weird sort of hustles that were like just sort of not very nice, Right. And a lot of shoplifting, a lot of just sort of, and what sucked about them the most, the fact that they're, really horrible to do to people, was you never quite got enough money. You always get like $20 and $30 little bits, and so you're always kind of sick. And the real, I don't know where it really came from, but at one point I got enough money together and I started selling meth to pay for my heroin habit, because I thought I wouldn't do it. Right. I did it here and there. And at one point, some guy trades me a gun for meth. And I was like, didn't really want it. I was like, what the fuck? But I thought I could resell it for more. Right. Who knows where that gun had been or what it had done, And it became a good idea at this point. This is where, where you're really crossing lines, to go do a holdup. Because I want to go do it. And so I did a typical liquor store holdup. Right. And, it took me 2 seconds to run in and run out, and I had $500.
Amazing.
And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is great. And
was your gun loaded?
No, it was not. It was not loaded. I didn't have bullets at that point. I didn't have money for bullets. The guy just traded me the gun, And I didn't know if it worked. And it was a big old 38, looked scary. Pull that thing out, you know.
Right.
And it was sort of like, it was an aha moment, like, whoa.
Right.
I did a couple of those. I did like gas station. I did a typical crappy, you know,
easy, low hanging fruit.
And one of them was really scary. It was like kind of like I think the guy was going for a gun under the counter or something was happening, and I was going, this is not good. And I sort of thought, like, where, you know, what else can I do here? And I also tried, you know, holding somebody up at the ATM, which is just so, you know, just horrible.
Too intimate.
Yeah, right. No, it is. And then, you know, you're right there with like, what's your PIN number? You know, and I was actually, I still had a bank account in those days, and something happened. I was in a bank. I went, wait a minute, let's check this out. And I went into the bank and I was cashing a check for probably some horrible job I did badly for somebody. And I looked at how it was going on, the drawer she was opening to cash the money and where the money was. And I said, I could do this. And so I went in and robbed a bank.
Which bank?
Allegedly, it was a bank in San Francisco in the it's called on Union Street in Union District down there. Very nice neighborhood, right near where I lived actually.
Yeah,
which was totally insane. And in my neighborhood, like, you can't go out of your neighborhood to go do it. No, that's too far away, you know. And I hooked up with a couple friends of mine, and we started doing it on a regular. So
you did the one bank, and it was successful.
Yeah.
And how much money did you walk away with?
$1,200.
$1,200. Yeah. And what, you just robbed the drawer at the front, basically?
Yeah. I mean, because there's three drawers. There's the working drawer that just has, you know, the regular what it is.
Right, a couple $1,000.
Probably has the die pack in it.
Right.
Then there's the larger drawer next to it, which is going to be which is probably about $10,000 in there.
Right.
Takes 2 keys to open, takes more time.
Right.
And then there's a third key that takes the manager, and when there's probably a good $100,000 or $50,000 in there or whatever, so they can do larger things.
Right.
And so, you know, I sort of saw all that happening. And, you know, for me to get in and out, you got about 90 seconds to get in and out before someone pulls a silent alarm. And so it's the kind of thing is for one person going out, I mean, all that stuff you see in the town and crap like that, they're shooting a gun in the air that, I mean, sure, people do that, but that's not your regular bank robber. Bank robbers get in the drawer and getting out, and, you know.
So you went up you go up to the teller and you just...
Yeah, pull the gun out, say it's a robbery, put everything in, throw the bag on, put everything in the bag, do it now, do it quick. I want no die packs.
Right.
They're going, here's die packs, you know.
And do they put die packs in anyway?
We got one once, you know.
Right.
Which you guys sort of get rid of before it blows up in your face and turns your whole interior of your car green, you know. And I hooked up with a couple friends of mine, a real good friend of mine that I've been doing a lot of drugs with, and he was an actor. Or budding actor.
Right.
And so, you know, it's all about getting your intimidating demeanor down.
Yeah.
And then another friend of ours was a younger kid, and he was going to be the driver. And we started doing it in earnest, and we started really getting into it. We all had heroin habits, really bad. And then there was my girlfriend I always had it covered there, too. And then we started being able to buy drugs in quantity. And, you know, this is a classic. So we're hitting up in our neighborhood, and we're wearing essentially what we wear.
Right.
And so the local newspaper, the Marina Times or where it was, and the Chronicle started, you know, talking about us.
Right.
And they started calling us the Men in Black. and we would get that, and we cut it out. I cut out the articles and taped them to the wall in my kitchen.
Amazing.
You know, so like that, I like reviews. Like
you know,
good
so
stuff.
Cool.
And then we sort of figured it's probably not a good idea. Probably not a good idea to wear what we're wearing.
Right.
And we started going to thrift stores and stuff, and we did things like, you know, wear suits and fake ponytails and fake mustaches and just go in and do things. We started getting really inventive, and because, you know, you got to sort of do these things. One time we went in kind of leathers and motorcycle helmets, and we jumped back into the car, so we figured they thought we were in on bikes, you know. There's just a bunch of stuff like that. A couple of robberies I did where we didn't have a car. We just took the stuff off and blended in the crowd downtown San Francisco and walked away, which is not expecting. A lot of things like that.
Right.
And sort of got away with it for like a year, almost 2 years.
Wow.
And a lot of money, and keeping it real under the wire. We started running out of banks in San Francisco because it's not a big space out like LA.
Right.
And started doing mega theaters because if you could hit them after a weekend,
like an AMC or something, right?
Yeah, because session stands and 10 theaters, you can walk away with $20,000, things like that.
Yeah,
you guys sort of case them and things. We cased a credit union. We did a bunch of stuff, got to be a thing, and we would take drugs and sit in the car and watch banks and watch things and sort of get into it.
Amazing.
Kind of a full-time job, What else?
And did you feel like you were in a movie? Like, did it feel like fun and glamorous?
Yeah. I mean, here's the real big thing: is that it was a big rush.
I bet.
To go in and do it, and people jump at your command. I mean, you got a gun in your hand. You're two guys with a gun in your hand. The things are happening. And drugs sort of neuter your sex drive, and I would come home after robbery and have sex, with my girlfriend,
sure.
I was dragged up.
And feeling great.
And that sort of became part of the ritual. Because addiction is a real ritual. You're shooting up drugs, you're doing these things, and it sort of became part of it. And, it also permeated everything. It's like I wouldn't even pay for anything anymore. I would just steal things. I was just like, it felt like this total...
Did you start putting bullets in your guns?
Yeah, I did. I started putting bullets in my gun. A couple of scary moments. We came out of a bank one time, and a cop just went by. Nothing.
Oblivious.
No alarm. Nothing going off like that. And there's another time where I saw somebody get arrested and guns drawn. I was just like, I don't know if I want to be part of this. I don't know if I was going to shoot anybody.
Right.
I have no idea.
Right. You just don't know what might happen.
And also, there's a whole mindset where you start thinking you're a badass.
Right.
And I was a 125, 5'10" badass. Blow me up with the wind.
Right.
But I had a really shitty attitude. I was like an angry guy. Really could get it going and. Things started, things kept that way for a long time. It escalated. I was really getting strung out, and drugs. I couldn't do enough drugs anymore. I started doing tons of benzos, Valiums, Klonopins. I started smoking. I was smoking crack. I was shooting speed. I was doing anything else to try and feel something. Right. It wasn't really working, and so I was a really a mess. And a friend of mine who was with me said, who was my partner in the whole thing. Said, this doesn't work anymore. I got to get the hell out of here. I'm going to go home to my family in Oregon. I was like, okay, cool. Right. He left, and I kept doing it myself with that kid. And it was, I wasn't taking precautions. I wasn't casing places. I wasn't doing anything, and I had this big, huge fear the cops were going to come in and kick in my door. Right. I was dreaming about it all the time. I was freaking out about it.
Figure out who you were.
Yeah.
Right.
And I did a robbery with this kid up in a small theater. I went in. I'd watched it before a long time ago when my friend was still around, and she would take the manager would take the money receipts on a Monday morning after the weekend of the concession stand, the theater, and go over to the bank next door, which was right next door to it. Right. It's in the Pacific Heights neighborhood in San Francisco. Right. And it would have been fine if I'd stick to the plan, but I couldn't do enough drugs to get out the door. Right. I was late as hell. We got there, the manager wasn't there anymore. She was next door in the bank. I held up the two young girls at the concession stand at the front door, and I got like a couple $100. Ran back out, jumped in the car. He had parked the car instead of leaving it running in front. Right. A bus came up, cut us off. All these people ran out, saw us. I'm taking my mask off. I'm like, oh shit. We drove over, we drove home, we called the dope man. The dope man came, I shot some drugs, and there was a knock at my door. And I went to go open the door, and the door just splinters and falls apart, and there's a million cops outside. Wow. And this tall, blonde woman cop steps in and smacks me in the face with the butt of a shotgun. I'm on the ground. Wow. There's 45s in my face. My girlfriend's in the back room doing her drugs. She's like, what's going on? And I was like, don't do anything. They came in through the window because it was a garden apartment. It was just crazy, and we got dragged out and put in separate patrol cars and taken downtown. And
did they know that you were more at this point? Had they somehow already put two and two together?
No, they just thought we had just done an armed robbery.
Right. Which is still, I guess,
top it all up, we parked the car out front of the house. So it's not like, incredible geniuses here. So we just found the car and went, they probably asked the neighbors who's the most scummy guy around here. Right. This guy, And the ride down to 850 Bryant, which is the cop station in San Francisco, was just like surreal. And I was like, this can't be happening. And then get booked into the jail and go through that whole routine. And then at one point they're sort of putting things together. And also top it all off, the cops come into my kitchen, and up on the wall is all those newspaper clippings, right? Like just classic, right? Like Brainchild.
Wait, I think this guy may be like, more than just the guy who knocked off the theater.
So it's like, like missing killed children milk cartons up on your wall or something, And they started putting two together, and I was before I was even into jail, I was still in intake. They started putting more and more together, and the FBI came in.
Right.
And the FBI said, FBI was like, we'll see what's happening here. And there was a woman guy team, and they were like real assholes. And they pulled out a like binder with all these pictures of people robbing banks, and they said, "Do you recognize anybody in there?" And I looked. It was literally like weird shots from cameras at the top of my head and stuff like that. I was like, "Nope, don't anything like that." And basically, what they passed. They passed on me because it was a theater that got busted on.
Right.
If it had been a bank, they would have gone for it. They said, if you got more evidence, we'll see what's happening. I didn't know this.
Right.
But then California came in, and literally, I'm getting arraigned the next day. The judge said they arraigned me on more charges than the one. I had 3 counts of armed robbery, and went in, and I had 6 right in front of the judge, and the judge said that we're looking at 3 striking you.
Right.
We're looking at you for 25 to life. And I said something like, "Are you fucking shitting me?" Because I'd never been arrested before.
Yeah.
And I was
How old are you at this point?
I would be like 39.
Right. Wow.
39.
Right.
Yeah. So August.
You had a pretty good long. And how many years had you been robbing banks at this point?
Couple years.
Never thought I would hear myself
say
those words in a podcast interview.
And I couldn't. It has to be in a couple $100,000 or more,
right?
Like that, because it never was big.
Right.
It was big. But biggest thing we ever got was a credit. What do you call it?
Credit union.
And
right.
it was $40,000.
Right.
So that's the most. I mean, so
it's a good haul.
It's a good haul, but I mean, it's also like it's a job where you're putting in work every week.
Sure.
Especially if a huge heroin habit.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I got, the kid got busted, but they couldn't really prove anything. He didn't go into the bank. He didn't go into the place. He was the driver. He got accessory, but he also had another charge he was waiting on for selling. So he got put away for that. They pulled my girlfriend in, and I said, she's got nothing to do with this.
Right.
And they want to give her possession. I said the drugs weren't hers.
Right.
And so they all came onto me. I sat in county jail for a year and a half fighting my case.
And the 6 charges they have against you are all related to this one theater?
No, they're more robberies.
They found some other robberies.
They looked at ammo, they looked at other
right.
things, and they said, this is what's happening.
Right.
And then Men in Black and a bunch of other stuff like that.
Right.
And then I kept getting more and more arraignments, and it kept to got it to be like 25. And so, and that was their case. And I also had, at that point, I had a public defender, and they're throwing things at me like,
And are you in touch with your family?
I'm in touch with my mom. My dad wasn't. I really didn't call everybody else.
Right.
Like that. I'm sure she called everybody else.
Right.
At one point, the family, my sister, my dad, and my mom, pony up for a lawyer.
Right.
And because it looks pretty bad.
Sure.
I don't know why they did that, because if they got me out on bail, I would have left. I was in that kind of headspace.
Sure.
And I was in county jail. It was just it was a mess. County jail was full of drugs.
Right.
So I kicked dope, got put in another section of the jail where there's just everybody I knew was selling drugs in there, and people putting money in my books like my mom, and I used that money to buy drugs. I got strung out again, and at some point I'm going to another arraignment with my lawyer, and he looks at me, and I just shot up that morning in jail. I'm in the bullpen behind the court, and he's like, "Are you loaded?" I go, "Yeah, I'm loaded."
Yeah.
"You don't know what it's like in here," And he's like, "You're out of your damn mind.
Right.
I'm trying to get you out of a 3 strikes case. What the hell's wrong with you?"
Right.
And he said, "Look, there's a recovery pod part in the jail, and I want you to transfer there, and I want you to stop using drugs."
Wow.
And I was like, fuck you. And
yeah,
he's like, no, fuck you.
Why would I do that?
And so I did. And I kicked drugs again in jail, and I went into this recovery pod, and it was like a program. It was very 12-step oriented, and it was a whole thing like that, but it was also attack therapy where they yelled at you.
Right.
And it was a separate part of the jail, except it was programmed during the day and then jail at night.
Right.
So it was a little weird, like you're a snitch, and it was kind of crazy, but there was no drugs there. And
right.
so I fought my case for 18 months.
But when you would go back into... You go to the program during the day and then back into jail at night?
No. It was a separate part of it. So it was a
so even when
part.
the daytime part was over, you were still in the part of the jail with no
part
drugs.
of the jail. The only thing I'm saying is that there was no instructors there or counselors at that point. So it sort of went back to the jail feeling. Right. And there was a lot of people there who were just trying to get out of going to prison the rest of their lives.
Sure. Yeah. But that's a good motivator.
Yeah. And there was a section of us. There was 5-6 of us who were all looking at 3 strikes.
Right.
And we were all drug addicts. It wasn't like we weren't.
Right.
It's like that. So it was. I mean, it was the best move I could. But they weren't letting me get a deal because of drugs. They never charged me for the drug possession. They just charged me for the armed robbery.
Sure.
And it went back and forth with a bunch of stuff like, we're gonna if you rat on people with you,
right.
and there was nobody with me. There was a kid driving, and it turned out he was already turning state's evidence on me, and he was their witness against me. And so it went back and forth, was like, come at me with 1 strike and 20 years and all this weird stuff back and forth. And my lawyer just said, just hold on, let's wait a while. I'll keep putting up motions and, when you
just wear them down.
Yeah. When you're not the flavor of the week, somebody else's worst is going to come down the road. And I remember going to court one day, and my blessed my mom's there, and I see my mom, and I look around. There's all these people look really familiar. There's a couple women there, and they're kind of glaring at me and like that. And I was like, wow, I got people fans of me, it's like that. And I look around, then there's the 2 cops that busted me, and there's something. I was like, oh shit. What are we doing here?
Something's going down.
It was actually, they were going to go into, they were going to, indictment, they were going to do the whole thing. Right then there, preliminary. And my lawyer went, whoa, cut the brakes. And he put a bunch of motions up, like illegal search, they would never found the gun, a bunch of other things, backed it off. And so 18 months of that back and forth. And they come at me with two time served, which is almost 2 years, 2 years and 2 strikes. And all I heard was, 2 years. And 2 strikes is really heavy in California. That means the next thing you do. And I said, yeah, I want to do that. So 2 years prison time with the 2 years I already did. And so it's 4 years basically, but I'm copying 2 years. And then I get out on parole and I with 2 strikes. And I'm sitting in the back of the court in the bullpen again, waiting to take this deal. And the DA comes up to me, and the DA says, we found a cost-effective way to deal with people like you. And I was like, really? And he said, well, yeah, you're going to go in, you're going to come out after 2 years, you're going to commit another crime, we're going to put you away for the rest of your life when you commit that crime. And I was like, oh. And I was like, okay.
Jeez, this guy's a real card.
Right. And then I was, but all I could hear was 2 years.
Yeah.
Take
it.
I had a get out date and like that. So I went to San Quentin, and started doing my time there. It's everything you think it is. It's scary as hell.
Right.
And best part of it was that I had the headspace of being on the streets and being crazy. And right now, if I went in there, I'd be scared as hell. There, I sort of got to kind of prove myself. But what sort of happened?
What did you have to do to survive? I mean, whatever, you see this shit in every prison movie where you go beat up the toughest guy on the yard.
Right. I didn't go and beat up the toughest guy. The reality is, and here's the weird part: I was sober.
Right.
I was not doing drugs. I was not. So if you're not in the mix, if you're not like you're gambling, if you're not buying drugs, if you're not into having sex, you're not doing all these kind of things, they have no use for you.
People everyone just wants to leave you alone.
There's nothing to do there. And my age is not going to get me to join a gang. It wasn't like, come on, kid, you're going to be a soldier. It's like, I was like 40, and so I got into a few things where people try to take my commissary usually, and everything's cut up by races. So it was, the tougher white guys trying to take your stuff.
Right.
And I got into a fight with that and, got my ass kicked, but I put up heart, whatever.
Right.
So, did the thing, due diligence, whatever, and sort of just skated. I just avoided people. But what I got into was, and I got into it in county, was I started writing.
Right.
And I started writing they had adult education classes, and I went to a bunch of creative writing classes and got into writing my stuff. And when I got to Quentin, I joined a writers group with a lot of people that were really serious about it. And
amazing.
I started getting like kind of respect for my writing, and I was writing about crimes I pulled and the neighborhoods I lived in and stuff like that without snitching or saying people's names, and I sort of really got into it, and I was always always looking for a creative expression. And I really do believe that art and film and music is everybody's telling a story.
Yeah,
and this sort of stripped it down to the bare basics,
right?
So like that. So that got me through. That's one kind of thing that got me through. I was kind of with the guys that were sort of very serious about what they were doing there, and I wasn't.
And like the other guys in your writing group.
Yeah.
What were they in for?
Oh, people, like half of them were there for the rest of their lives.
Right.
After they're there for murder, you're never gonna see them like light of day again.
Right.
So there's different levels in California prison system. It's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and level 4 is like for murderers and bank robbers and people that are violent crimes like that. And it's actually this is weird, but it's actually the place you want to be because it's not full of sort of petty people doing petty shit. It's much more serious. There's less drama involved.
Yeah, because they're there. This is their life.
Right. This is their house.
Like they don't want to shit on their own doorstep.
And the other, the lower levels in prison, people coming in and out all day long. It's all crazy. People stealing from each other. It's insane.
Right.
Not that stuff wasn't going on.
Right, but there's a little bit more of a society.
Yeah. And prison is unbelievable amounts of boredom, like unbelievable, just routine daily boredom punctuated by extreme violent moments.
Right.
And it's just unbelievable when it happens. It's just and what's going to happen. It's crazy. It's like it's the feeling is electric, like they talk about.
Right.
And it's intense. So I did my 18 months. I did less. I did like 18 months or so, and got out. And it's not the kind of thing you're like. Projecting to people who are there for life. You're like, I'm getting out in 18 months.
Yeah, right.
You don't do that kind of like
just
that.
Keep a low profile.
Yeah. But I had a moment of clarity. I walked down in the yard in San Quentin, foggy day. Out in front of you are the hills of Marin. It's beautiful.
It's like the most valuable piece of property
in
America.
Unbelievable. It's there. And I looked around, I saw all the segregated people, and there was like everybody's like, it was just gray and ugly and bad. And I was literally like, I'm 41 years old. How did this happen?
Right.
And it wasn't like how did this happen? Like, I knew I did the crimes, I do all this stuff. I knew this, everything. I knew what got me there, but how did my life change from being that kid 17-year-old kid going to art school, wanting to know about art and music and all this stuff like that, to some guy with a gun,
right?
And it was not creative, not doing anything, and I definitely made a vow to myself that I'm not going to come back.
Sure.
And the idea that one more crime would put me here for life, and there's nothing happening. There's nothing good about it. There's nothing going on there.
Right.
And then to look outside and across there's the Larkspur Ferry going by. You get people talking
normal
on
life.
It. Yeah. And I'm like, this is not happening. And so I made a vow never to come back. And like on a Friday night around Christmas time, they kicked me out. They give you $200 gate money, it's called. Mm-hmm. And so here's $200 in a really horrible prison issued like kind of suit, but it's not really suit, it's clothes. And they drive you over to the bus station and give you fare. And I took the bus into San Francisco, and it was Friday night downtown San Francisco. Got off the bus and went, what the fuck?
And do they give you? I mean, that's coming. How much lead time do you have?
They set a date, but you don't know if that's going to happen.
Right.
You don't know.
Did you get out early for good behavior?
Yeah, I got out early for what's called good time,
right.
Which is basically you're not in trouble, and every day you're in there, is another day gets knocked off,
right.
and also I got knocked out for overcrowding.
Right.
It was pretty bad, and it's odd that I didn't get sent to another prison because not many people hang out in San Quentin.
Yeah.
That's called an entry level, and you go in there and they get dispersed out to the other prisons.
Sure.
But I don't know if it was local or what was happening. I was in there, so it stayed there.
And no one came to meet you at the gate?
No. I didn't. I just. Well, for one, I didn't know when I was getting out, so it wasn't like kind of like that. Also, I was kind of. I knew my mother cared, but I just sort of felt really shitty about everything.
Sure,
I didn't feel good about it.
I
had a lot of time to think about this shit. And I knew the money's burning a hole in my pocket. I knew I could go one way or another, and. When I was in county at one point, I applied to go to a rehab, a hardcore rehab, which is behavior modification rehab, trying to get an alternative sentencing, but the sheriffs wouldn't go for the court wouldn't go for that, and so I went to that same rehab, and I got a pack of cigarettes, sat on the front porch, In the morning, showed up. The woman that run the place showed up, and I said, "Hey, I wanted your program." And she said, "There's no room. Come back, next week." And blah 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 blah. And I said, I have nowhere to go." And she said, "I'm sorry." And so I sat on the front steps of that building for 2 days. And finally, at the end of the second day, she came out and said, "Come on in.
Wow.
We're taking you." And it was a hardcore program, co-ed giant program. And I went in, and I was scared as hell. Just totally scared as hell. And it was a behavior modification program where they break you down and scream at you and tell you you're a piece of shit, shave your head, and I knew I was a piece of shit. They didn't have to tell me.
Intense, man.
Yeah. So I went in there and I did program.
How long a program was that?
I was in there for 18 months.
Wow.
And so at 18 months they say you can stick around the house and stay in the program for like life and be part of the program and be working for the program, be a counselor and all this stuff like that. Or this is the time you can go. And I said, I got this. And
do programs like that still exist?
Yeah.
Is that still
but they're not like that. They're not like that.
Right.
The only ones that are kind of like that are those weird ones where they kidnap kids and take them out to the
like
wilderness.
in Utah, right. Yeah, that's crazy. And did you feel like it was effective?
Well, one thing they did is they really addressed my anger. I was an angry guy, and and I felt the world owed me. I was one of those guys that would go into the studio, record music, sit in the bathroom and shoot heroin, never make any music, never go play anywhere, and wonder why the world had discovered me. That's what I
relate to that. I think a lot of us do. It's like, I'm a genius. Why hasn't the world come knocking on my door?
Exactly.
And how'd you pay for it?
In those days it was before insurance, and what they did is they put you on general assistance, or what I'm not sure it's called down here, and food stamps, and that paid for it.
Right.
And then because I was on parole paid for the other half of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so that was, and I went in there, and if you would ask me then, I would say I never was going to do heroin again.
Right.
And then I got out, and I got the girlfriend, the apartment, the car, the job, and thought I was, living everything, no recovery whatsoever. And I was San Francisco right before the .com, and my landlord was a piece of shit, and he wanted to raise the rent, and it was rent control, and he just changed the locks and kicked me out.
Right. And
I came home one day to my closer and stuff was out in front of the street, and I didn't have any way to cope with it at all.
Right.
My answer was I got on the bus driving down to the dope man, and I shot dope.
Wow.
I was still on parole. It was called high control parole. The guy was basically called absconding, and that in itself could get me sent back to San Quentin.
But for what?
For not, you have to register and go down to see the parole officer every month. I wasn't doing that.
Oh, right. So you had an appointment coming up that you just blew off.
And on top of that, I had drugs in my system.
Yeah, sure.
And so when I did go see at some point, I didn't go see him. I just called him. I said, I said I can't come in. This isn't going to work. He said, you're going back to Quentin. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm running. Like I was trying to work it out with him.
Right.
So for that next 6 months, worst part of my life ever. I was like, absconding from them, trying to get things together, doing petty crimes, doing everything that the DA said I was going to do to get put away. And I just couldn't do enough heroin to make it all right. I'd never quite got
shut it up.
That. Yeah. And at some point, I just said fuck it, and I went to another program. I went to a like a men's shelter, Salvation Army, shitty, horrible community program. It was just the last house on the left. And went in there, and they accepted me. I told them I would kick dope, and I was still strung out. And I went in there and kicked in their dorm over the weekend, called the PO and said, I'm in program. He said, you stay there, I won't violate you. And I went back in there, and it was like, it's Salvation Army. They're faith-based, Christians. Let's all pray. And I'm like, oh my God. And I was there, and I was a horrible client. I was having sex with the women in the program. I was doing all the stuff bad. And at one point, my counselor was like, we're kicking you out. And I was like, no, you can't do that. He said, well, you start going to meetings, start doing something, get a sponsor, do this whole thing. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And I said, if my life isn't good, it better in a year. Screw this stuff.
Right.
And so, God damn it, a year later, my life was better.
And you stayed there for the whole year?
I stayed there for another 18 months.
Another 18 months?
Yeah.
And you could live there?
Yeah. And I started working for them in their program.
Right, sort of mopping floors and shit.
No, actually, I was the receptionist for the front door, and I was the go between clients and the other counselors.
Right.
And so I sort of got it, because I was mopping the floors, I was doing janitorial, I was doing things that sort of worked my way up because I could, I was a little more articulate than the rest of them there and could form a sentence and things like that. And so
after you'd gotten out of the behavioral modification therapy. And you had an apartment and a girlfriend. Mm-hmm. What was your job? What kind of work? I
was back in construction and house painting.
Nice.
Because the easiest job to give with a criminal record.
Right. And so a year later, how is your life better at that point?
Things were better in the way that I'd gotten off parole.
You'd gotten off parole.
Yeah, the guy.
Why did your parole officer take mercy on you and decide not to violate you?
Again, overcrowding, on top of it all, a bunch of stuff like that. And I was on parole, high control parole for 3 years.
Right.
Which is
and wouldn't you have to drug test for that?
Yeah.
Every time you go in?
Yeah, drug test every time I go in. Also with high control parole, they show up at your workplace. They come see your landlord. They're pretty hardcore.
And he must have had some person he was reporting to say, hey, I'm mm-hmm. letting this one string along because whatever.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, I probably wasn't the worst person he was.
Sure. Yeah. That's right.
I was pretty bad. I mean, they were pretty bad out there.
Right.
And so I was working the front door, and this guy would come in who would pick up and drop off clients for another program. And he said, "You ever thought about doing this for a living?" And I was like, "No."
Right.
And so when you graduate, come see me. And I went and I applied for a counselor job at another program and got it.
Right.
And started working there and started working in treatment.
And when he says graduate, was there an actual sort of graduation from Salvation Army?
They give you a certificate and you sort of get out.
Right.
But it was in San Francisco, I had to live in a crack hotel because there was nowhere else to go. I didn't have like a rent history. I didn't have money. So I was living in the same kind of neighborhood in a really rough neighborhood with hookers and trannies and all this stuff and then going to be a counselor during the day and night and doing this stuff. So it was a real test. But because my life was better, I wanted to do this thing. I really wanted to do this thing. And also one thing that kept me sober was that you can't go to a program and tell people to stay sober if you're dirty.
Was there a moment in this last stint when you're at the Salvation Army and stuff where it all started to make sense to you?
Yeah. When I started doing some of the step work and went to make amends to my family and did some things like that and saw the reaction from people, and things like people like, "Can you house sit my house?" I'm like, "Really?
Right, man.
Are you crazy?" Which wouldn't have happened 8 years earlier. I kind of like that. And people started feeling responsible, and people started looking at you different. One of the weirdest things ever was I was on my way to taking a bus to go to the hospital. There's a free clinic at the San Francisco General Hospital you go to, and I had something like a cold or something. I wanted a flu, or I forget what it was. And I was on the bus, and this little old lady was getting off the bus, and she said, "Could you give me a hand?" And I was like, "Wow, that's weird that she would ask me to give her a hand, And I held up my hand and got her off the bus, and she said, "Could you walk me across the street?" And the whole thing, I was thinking, like, do you know who I am?
Are you crazy?
Is this insane? And I thought something must be different in me that this woman would actually ask me to do this. And we talked, and I walked her into the hospital. I got her to where she was going, and I walked away feeling like, oh my God, there's a and this sounds weird and melodramatic, but it was a spiritual change in me, because I would have probably told her to go fuck off in the old days. I got time to take you anywhere. And this was like, like wow, like somebody looked at me and said, this person actually cares.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's amazing. So that was, there was some definite. Those were the kind of things where it sort of said things are better,
right?
And I talk with this a lot with people. It's like that. There's nothing says, oh, you're doing better, but like, I'm able to handle situations better. I'm able to talk to people. I'm able to be in a situation where a few years ago I would have gone, well, you were just going off the handle and been crazy.
Right.
And that's always been the sign that my program is that
you're getting better.
Yeah.
And have you stayed? That's what you do, right? You're
yeah. My day job is I'm a counselor at a drug and rehab, a mental health and drug and alcohol.
And how long ago was it that you?
I have 21 years.
21 years.
Coming up on 22 in January.
And how long have you been down living here in LA?
10 years.
10 years.
So what happened was that I've been working as a counselor for 6 years. And the feds came in and said you have to be registered. You have to be you have to go to school and be a drug and alcohol counselor. And I was like, I've been doing this forever. I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And so my dad was still alive, and I told him about that. And he goes, well, what do you want to do? What, you want to go to school for anything? And I go, yeah, I want to be a writer.
Right.
And he said, go be a fucking writer, dude.
Right.
And I was like, okay. And I went back to school and got my master's in creative writing. And
where'd you go?
I went to Antioch, University of Los Angeles.
Nice. Right.
And went in there and I kind of wanted to be a writer, but I never thought I was a writer.
Sure.
And sort of somehow that legitimized it. And then I got involved with the community here. And then I wanted to teach. And so I was trying to get a teaching job in the Bay Area, and there wasn't anything up there. And I knew people down here. And a friend of mine's wife who teaches at LA Valley College, she said, come on down, and I'll hire you as my assistant teacher. And I was like, cool. And I came down here and started doing that. Plus, what really blew my mind, and nobody really talks about it, is there's a huge literary community here in LA that's rivals New York. I mean, it's quite big. There's a lot of writers and teachers and things going on here.
I guess it's so eclipsed by the Hollywood of it all.
Exactly.
Everyone's always talking about the money and glamour of Hollywood. So.
Yeah.
And are you still teaching?
Yeah, I still teach. I teach creative writing at Antioch for their continuing education program, and then I work with the same woman. And I just really basically grade papers online.
Right.
I don't go there anymore.
And do you? And what's going on with your writing?
I put out a couple of books.
Oh, nice.
I put out the first book. It was all about the story I just told you.
Right.
It's called Gun, Needle, Spoon.
Spoon.
I put that out. Originally, I put out a version of it in France called Hold Up. Uh-huh. But the French didn't want the recovery part. They just wanted all the dirt.
Right.
So I put that out in 2013. Gun, Needle, Spoon came out in 2015 in America. And then just recently, this year, I just put out a book about touring rock and roll, touring the punk rock days, and drug addiction. It's called Anarchy at the Circle K.
Amazing.
And that just came out. I've also been involved in a couple other books. I did some writing for Penn's Prison Project, and a couple other. I did a recovery book with the author James Brown, who did L.A. Diaries. I don't know if you've ever read that.
No.
He's in recovery, and we wrote a book called How Writing Can Save Your Life.
Right. Oh, cool.
I did that kind of stuff, and so
How can writing save your life?
Well, it's all about taking your work and really getting cathartic and getting in there and digging around why you're using and what's happening, and the poor man's therapy on paper, sort of, kind of thing like that. We just
I find writing therapeutic when I do it, but when I do it for therapeutic reasons. It does. It works.
Yeah.
I just I don't think to do it enough.
But the ending to the story, which is crazy, is that it's not the ending. It's just sort of the part. Is that a few years ago, I ran into a friend of mine, Natasha Dion, who's a writer. She put out a couple of really big books recently, Grace and a few other books. She is a lawyer. And she does pro bono work for getting your records expunged. And she said, let's try this. Let's see what happens. And so I went in front of the court in downtown Los Angeles and got what's known as a certificate of rehabilitation from the state of California. And usually you put it to the court, and the court thinks about it and comes back to you. And we went in there, and I presented everything who I am and everything I've done. And I worked in recovery for 20 years and done all this stuff. And the judge looked at me and said, "Yeah, let's do this." Bam, he gave it to me. They take that, and it goes on to the desk of the governor. And so it went on the governor for a full pardon. It was Jerry Brown. And I'm getting out of work one day, and I walk around the corner and my fucking car got towed, and it's raining. I'm just like, piece of shit,
Jesus
and goddamn, I call where it is. It's in West Hollywood tow yard. I get on the bus, and I'm on the bus, and my phone rings, and it's a Sacramento number. I go, what the hell? I answer it, and they go, Mr. O'Neill. I go, yeah. And he goes, this is the governor's office. We're giving you a full pardon. And I got a governor's pardon. It was like amazing, man. So it's like it's gone full circle, and that's really like that's the gifts, man. It's the gifts of being in recovery.
Is your mom still alive?
Yeah, my mom's still alive. Yeah,
how's she?
Not well.
Right.
She's had it rough. She's discovered the wide world of pharmaceuticals as an older person.
Sure.
And her health is really bad and stuff like that. So she's taking it hard.
And did you feel like you got a chance to sort of reconcile with your father? Like, were you guys on good terms by the end?
Yeah, we were on really good terms at the end, and it was really important to me,
Yeah, sure.
I dedicated my last book to him. He was really instrumental in me going back to school. Mm-hmm. He was my editor for my first book. I sent all my stuff to him and he edited back. And I think it also answered a bunch of his questions.
Yeah,
they talked about a bunch of stuff.
Sure.
And I like to think that we were in good terms, and I really have a good relationship with all my family right now. And I really I became the brother that's actually responsible and does things, and became the son that actually cares. And I came to a understanding of how to deal, not what expectations I have with people, and looking at people in a way that this is what they're capable of doing, and if I'm expecting them to be something else, then I'm the one that's upset and having a problem.
Right.
And if I go to them and say, this is what you're doing, this is who you are, and I love you, then I'm not walking away saying, why isn't my mother the mother I always wanted, and our relationship is especially better. It just become, it's just putting the principles in all my affairs really what it comes down to, how it works for me.
Did you actually explicitly have that conversation with your mom?
I didn't.
You're not really the person I hoped you'd be. I'm okay with it.
But I kept going to her house and walking away going, God damn it, why isn't she June Cleaver baking cookies? I don't know why I would think that. And then the day that I said, she's just this is what she's capable of. This is who she is. Yeah. I went to saw her and we had a good visit, and then she started doing her crazy stuff that she wanted to yell at me about, and I was like, oh, see you later, Mom.
Right.
And I walked out the door and I was locked away going, I don't feel like shit. I don't feel like upset about it, which is a gift. It's amazing.
I mean, it's interesting sitting here looking at you, and I can see how a judge would take one look at your presence in his courtroom and say, yeah, of course. And obviously to get from where you were to here is like an epic journey. Do you think there's a way you could have avoided it? Like, is there a spot or a time or some bit of wisdom that if it had only fallen on your...
Because people told me the route you're going, you're gonna be in jail, or you're gonna be dead. And I'm like, not me. And for a lot of time, I regret going to prison. That's a horrible experience. But also, that's the experience that made me who I am. Yeah. And give me a level of discourse with some people that I can really talk to.
All right. Of course.
Especially in my line of work. And I don't have time to sit there and regret the past. I would love if some things didn't happen. I don't know what my life would be like if I didn't ever touch heroin.
Right.
Right. And it sort of annoys the hell out of me when I go have an operation. I can't get pills at the end to take away the pain because that's what they're for. Yeah, sure. That kind of thing. And so there's that. But I really feel that I was able to evolve through recovery and become the person I am. And I don't know if I would have been that way because I was an angry guy that felt entitled. Yeah. And I don't know if that would have been a wake up call at some point. I don't know. Who knows?
Who knows? Right? Yeah. No, I was just curious if it's actually a question I never asked before, and I was just wondering if
it's a valid question.
Case, there was an answer. Yeah. Well, look, this has been amazing. I don't have anything. It's such a great, beautiful, intense, mystifying story.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing it.
It's been an honor. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.